So some of you guys had messaged me on Instagram to do an updated brow routine. So I have a few different ways in which I like to fill in my brows. On days when I don't have time, brow pencil is a choice for me, but I haven't been doing that much recently. What I have been doing is I've been using brow powders, so that's number one method of how I fill in my brows. And secondly, I've been filling in my brows using the Anastasia brow pomade. So any form of gel will work. You don't have to specifically use the products that I have shown in the video, but just know that if you have similar skin coloring and hair color as mine, you might want to look for similar tones in other eyeshadows or products that you may have. By the way, if you find these brow tutorials useful, please don't forget to hit that like button and also consider subscribing to my channel. So starting with the first method, where I'm going to use eyeshadows or brow powders to fill in my brows. Here I'm just showing you which areas are kind of sparse and that really need filling up. So for me, that's the start of my brows, and then more towards the arch of my brows and some towards the tail of my brow. So irrespective of what method you choose, you always want to have an eyebrow brush and a spoolie. So I'm just going to use this spoolie from the Anastasia brow brush. I'm going to list all the products I'm using and the tools in the description box below if you'd like to see specifically. And for the brow powder, I tend to use this kind of a very thin angled liner brush or brow brush. So this brush is by MAC, and as you can see, it's a really fine tip brush, and I like this because it can mimic hair-like strokes, so that's the reason I like a really thin brush. So the powder that I like to use is actually an eyeshadow, and this is the eyeshadow Brun by MAC. And as you can see, compared to my brow hair, it's quite a bit light for my brow hair. But if I were to go in with black entirely on my brows, it just looks very harsh and not that flattering. So I tend to use this shade, and you'll see in the demo that it actually goes on a little bit darker because it's kind of mimicking the shadow of the hair on the skin, if that makes sense. So choose an eyeshadow that has brown but also gray undertone. So you want a cool brown for this. Never go in with a warm brown if you have really dark hair and cool toned hair like mine. So that's the eyeshadow we'll be using. And the second one is a black. This is by Bobbi Brown, and it's their Coal Cake Liner, I believe, in black. Just use any light black eyeshadow. So don't go in with Corrupt by Makeup Geek. Instead, you can use, say, for example, lesser pigmented ones. So say Carbon by MAC would be a good choice. So first, starting with the brown eyeshadow, I've loaded up the tip of the brush, and I'm first going to focus this on the bottom of my brow so I can have some shape. And I like to start not exactly in the front of the brow but slightly behind, and then I continue to fill in that area and move towards the front as the brush has less product in it. So again, just create short hair-like strokes that kind of mimic hair. So just going about filling that brow. So once the front of the brow is done, then I tend to move towards the middle arch area. Fill it in from the bottom. And then fill in a bit from the top. So again, you can shape the arch however you like to, but I just like to follow the natural arch my brows have. So just filling in the tail. And then brushing through the eyebrows with my spoolie. This is really important because it distributes the product evenly through the brows, makes lines less harsh, and also removes excess powder if there is some. So once I've combed through, I can still see some areas that are kind of sparse. So just going in and adding some more eyeshadow to those areas. And then to add further definition, since this kind of looks a little too warm compared to the hair on my head, I tend to use a little bit of black eyeshadow, just adding it to areas that still look a little bit bald. So I'm just adding it there. But the key to getting natural looking brows, personally I feel, is that you still want to see skin showing through the brow hairs. You don't want it completely filled in like a block. So that's really important. So don't overdo it. Remember, less is always more. So I just strategically placed the black eyeshadow where I feel I need more definition, which for me was the arch and this bottom portion close to the start of my brows. And in case you make any mistakes, don't worry, this is just powder, so you can just go ahead and take a Q-tip and just run it through and clean it up like I did here. Another tip is to angle your eyebrows sideways like this, especially if you do makeup tutorials like I do, because certain things that you don't see with naked eye can be picked up by the camera. So I like to angle my eyebrow like this and then fill in the bottom just so that there's a nice even line there. Finally, I'm just extending the tail of my brows a little bit. And that's it. That's how I like to fill my brows for a more natural look using powders or eyeshadows. So here's the before and here's the after. You can see that it's really made a big difference, but it still doesn't look stark or like completely blocked in or filled in. So moving on to the second brow, where I'm going to use my brow pomade. And for that, I like to use my Anastasia dual-ended brush. I believe this is brush number 12, which has this relatively fatter synthetic brush on one end, and it has a spoolie on the other side. So as you can see, the tip of this brush is way fatter than the one we used with the powder. It's just a personal choice. I do feel like synthetic brushes do better with cream products, so that's the reason I use this one. And this is the Anastasia Dipbrow pomade in the shade Granite or Granite that I like to use for my skin coloring and hair coloring. Now I do have other shades that I'm going to show you right here. So it's really important when choosing a pomade to have a good shade for you. So I have 4 colors of pomades, and the one I use is Granite, but in the past I've also used these other colors that I'm showing you here. So as you can see here, medium brown looks almost gray on my skin tone. It's not deep enough for my dark hair. Then as we move along to ebony and dark brown, both of these seem to have a warmer undertone. So as a result, they look almost reddish on my skin tone. So that's the reason I don't tend to use those as well. Whereas Granite, on the other hand, has a really deep dark gray-black undertone, so that's the reason that shade tends to work best for my hair coloring. The second important step when it comes to using pomades is to use less. I can't stress how important this is, because I think this is why people struggle the most when using pomades, is that they end up using too much and then they have no control of how much product they're putting on their eyebrows. So what I like to do is dip my brush once into the pomade, just lightly touch it. Whatever comes on the brush, don't just straight away apply it to the brows. That's a mistake I used to do all the time when I first started using pomades. So I like to swipe the brush on the cap, on the inside of the cap. So like this, it takes off excess product. So I do that from both sides of the brush. So as you can see here, a lot of the product came out from the sides of the brush. Now whatever's remaining on my brush, I'm going to make similar hair-like strokes like we did with the brow powder. So just do these strokes in the direction of the hair growth. So like so, you can see that it's starting to fill up. And as the amount of product on my brush is getting less, I'm moving towards the start of my eyebrows. And then just taking a little bit at a time from the inside of the cap where we put most of the product, just going around and filling in the eyebrows. Wherever my brow is kind of sparse, just going around and doing that. As you can see with the brow pomade, the brow fills up really quickly. That one dip that I did initially into the brow pomade was enough to cover my entire brow. So that's how little product you actually need. And just to clean up, because I haven't waxed, I have some little hair growing just below the brow, and to clean up towards the tail, I'm going to use my concealer. This is the Nars Radiant Creamy Concealer, and the shade is Ginger. I'm going to use that on a flat brush. This is the Morphe M421. I'm going to take a small amount and start applying it on the bottom of the brow, blending it all the way from the start to the tail of the brow. And that's it. That's how I like to fill in my brows using a brow pomade. And here's a before and after. So I hope this video was helpful to those of you who had asked for it. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in my next one. Bye!
Open eye, feel the waves cut through me.